Hello everyone. Today's story unfolds from a love that was never truly buried, only waiting, growing sharper with time, returning more intense and far more dangerous than before. This is a story steeped in longing, quiet tension, and a connection that refuses to stay hidden any longer. The woman who shattered something inside me before I even understood what it meant to be whole, stood at the front of my senior seminar, writing her name across the whiteboard with calm precision. Camille Ardan. For a brief, impossible moment, my body forgot how to function. I was 18 again, clutching a folded confession letter with trembling hands, hearing her gentle rejection. The kind that hurts more than cruelty ever could. She turned to face the room, marker still in hand. Welcome to Obsession and Ethics in Modern Fiction. Her voice had changed, deeper, smoother, controlled, but it struck something in me instantly. My pulse pounded so violently it narrowed my vision. I had chosen this course for convenience, for a final credit, for a clean ending to my academic life. Instead, I walked straight into her. Camille looked older now, but only in ways that made her more formidable, more certain, more untouchable. Every detail of her presence felt deliberate. Every movement carried restraint. Her gaze swept across the room and then landed on me. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. A pause, a fracture. Something unspoken but unmistakable. No one else noticed. I did because I had spent years memorizing the subtle ways she concealed what she refused to admit. She introduced herself formally, her tone sharpening just slightly when she spoke. She laid out her expectations with precision, drawing a clear line between fascination and justification, between obsession and truth. To everyone else, she was composed, intimidating, brilliant. To me, she was holding herself together with visible effort. She avoided calling on me, avoided lingering near me, avoided letting her gaze settle for too long. That distance said more than any acknowledgement could. When class ended and the room emptied, she asked me to stay. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything spoken. She stood at the front of the room, controlled, distant. I stayed near the door, unwilling to step closer into something that already felt like damage waiting to happen. She spoke first, formal and measured, reducing everything between us to prior acquaintance. The words landed like an insult wrapped in politeness. I answered with sharp honesty, unable to pretend the past had been insignificant. The memory of that rejection still carried weight, still held shape. Her reaction wasn't denial, it was restraint, careful. Locked down, she insisted on professionalism, on boundaries, on structure. No exceptions, no blurred lines, no acknowledgement of anything beyond roles and rules. It should have made things easier. It didn't. One sentence slipped from her control. Quiet, almost accidental, but real enough to break through everything else. You were never trivial. That single admission disrupted everything she had tried to contain, and just as quickly, she retreated behind distance again, dismissing me like nothing had happened. I left the room unsteady, carrying more than I walked in with. More confusion, more anger, more truth than I was ready to face. In the hallway, the past pressed closer. 4 years earlier, she had entered my life as a mentor. Brilliant, distant, impossibly compelling. She treated my words like they mattered. She challenged me in ways no one else ever had. She once told me I was too good at making pain look clean. That I needed to stop hiding it behind neat sentences. Back then, I didn't understand what she meant. Now, standing on the edge of something unfinished and undeniable, it was clear some things are never cleaned up. Some feelings don't fade, they wait, they deepen, and when they return, they demand to be faced. No one had ever understood me that quickly, that completely. My feelings for her arrived without warning, intense and impossible to hide, like something already out of control. It wasn't only her beauty, though she had that in quiet, undeniable ways. It was how she listened, never rushing, never interrupting. She held silence open until the truth had no choice but to step forward. She never flirted, never encouraged admiration, never treated attention like something to be used. That restraint only made everything stronger. I didn't just want her. I wanted to become more because of her. On graduation night, caught somewhere between relief and fear, and the sense that life was finally beginning, I found her outside beneath cheap strings of white lights. I handed her the note I had written, my hands steady only because I refused to let them shake. Then I said it out loud, because courage at 18 doesn't understand consequences. She looked at me for a long time, long enough to feel like hope. Then she said my name softly and refused me. Every word that followed stayed with me. She spoke about my future, about the edge of my life, about refusing to make herself the center of something that should belong to me. She said what I felt was real, and that was exactly why she had to be careful with it. She believed one day I would understand that her refusal was kindness. At the time, all I heard was the rejection. I cried alone afterward, shut her out completely, then quietly let her presence back in without ever reaching out. I stayed in the same city, telling myself it was for practical reasons, refusing to admit I hoped she might still exist somewhere within it. Time passed. Life moved. Mistakes were made. Directions changed. I built something stable enough to stand on. Eventually, the memory of her stopped feeling like it would destroy me, until it didn't. Telling the story out loud later reduced it to something simpler than it really was. On the surface, it sounded like a clean situation, right choice, wrong timing, unfortunate coincidence. But the truth never felt that simple. What stayed with me wasn't just that she had refused me. It was how she had done it, carefully, gently, with a kind of respect that made it impossible to turn her into something easy to hate. If she had dismissed me, if she had mocked what I felt, it would have been easier to move on. Instead, she treated it like it mattered, and still said no. That kind of rejection doesn't disappear. It settles, deepens, changes form. I told myself the shock of seeing her again would fade. It didn't. By the second class, I had perfected distance. Arriving just in time, choosing a seat that kept space between us, pretending that space meant control. She treated me exactly like every other student, precise, fair, unreadable. If anything, she leaned harder into neutrality. She challenged weak arguments without hesitation. She rewarded sharp thinking sparingly enough that praise felt earned. When I spoke, she listened with the same calm attention she gave everyone else. But I could see the effort behind it. Small things gave her away. The way she pressed her thumb against her notes. The careful use of my last name instead of my first. The fraction of a pause before meeting my eyes. Our first real collision came in the third week. She assigned a paper filled with longing and flawed decisions, the kind of material that felt almost deliberate. I wrote mine late at night, too aware of every word I was choosing. When she returned it, the pages were covered in her handwriting, not harsher but deeper. Questions layered in the margins. Entire sections marked and pushed further. One line stood out, underlined with precision, a refusal to accept the character as passive. At the bottom, she had written a simple invitation to continue the discussion during office hours. It was routine, professional. It didn't feel that way. I went anyway, pulled by equal parts curiosity and something I refused to name. Her office was exactly what it should have been. Orderly, thoughtful, filled with books and quiet details that reflected control. The door stayed open, boundaries clearly in place. When it was my turn, I stepped inside carrying more awareness than I wanted. We sat across from each other, the desk between us acting as both barrier and illusion. I reached for the paper at the same time she did. Our fingers brushed. It was nothing. It should have been nothing. My body reacted as if it meant everything. She pulled back immediately, restoring distance as if it had never been broken. I focused on the paper, forcing the moment into something smaller than it felt. We spoke about the work, about interpretation, about choice. She pushed against my arguments with clarity, refusing to let me hide behind safe conclusions. Her focus was steady, but something beneath it remained unresolved. When I challenged her, when I stepped slightly outside the structure she had built, the shift was immediate. My name slipped from her again, softer this time, almost unguarded. It changed the air between us. She corrected herself quickly, returning to formality. But the moment lingered. Everything about her said control. Everything underneath it suggested effort. She spoke about honesty in writing, about not protecting characters from their own desires, about recognizing what they refused to admit. The words were meant for the page. They didn't stay there. I noticed the details I wasn't supposed to notice. The same blue ink, the same habits, the same small consistencies that proved memory hadn't belonged to just one side. That realization affected her more than anything else had. For the first time, her composure cracked. Not completely, but enough to reveal something real beneath it. The distance returned just as quickly, reinforced, deliberate. Then the conversation shifted. Not into anger, not into coldness, into something quieter, heavier. A question she didn't fully ask, but didn't hide either. What this was supposed to be now, what remained, what was expected. There wasn't an easy answer, there never had been. I stayed where I was, caught between past and present, knowing only one thing for certain. If clarity existed, it wouldn't have brought me back to her. And whatever this was now, it wasn't finished. Something pained flickered across her face before she folded her hands neatly on the desk, as if control could be rebuilt through posture alone. Her voice steadied. She made herself clear in a way she hadn't 4 years ago. She remembered everything. My name, my work, the note I had given her. None of it, she insisted, changed the present. There were lines she would not cross. Not emotionally, not professionally, not in any way that risked either of us. I should have accepted that. Instead, the words that came out of me pushed straight against the boundary she had drawn. There had been another option, one she hadn't named. She could have said she felt nothing. That was where her composure finally cracked. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me. A pulse jumped in her throat, her hands tightening just slightly before she pulled everything back into place. The conversation ended there, at least on the surface. She dismissed me with careful formality, but the impact of that moment lingered far beyond the room. At the door, she said my name again. I stopped, not turning, holding myself still, as she admitted something she hadn't given me before. That I had deserved a more honest explanation back then. For a moment, it felt like something real might finally be offered. But it didn't come. The silence stretched, and when the answer arrived, it was final. Nothing more. I left with that absence sitting heavier than any explanation could have. By the time I reached the stairwell, the strength I had been holding together gave way. I sat on the top step, my paper crushed in my hand, frustration and something deeper unraveling at once. It didn't make sense. I wasn't 18 anymore. Life had already tested me in ways that should have built resistance. I had endured complicated relationships, unstable living situations, academic pressure, family fractures. I had learned independence, responsibility, control. None of it mattered. All it took was her presence, her voice, the smallest contact, to reduce everything back to something raw and immediate, and instead of fading, it intensified. Distance, once acknowledged, only sharpened the outline of what stood between us. She began calling on me more often in class. It should have felt normal. My work justified it, my participation made sense. It didn't feel normal. It felt personal in a way that had no right to exist. Her questions landed directly, cutting through discussion and settling on me with deliberate focus. The room would shift, attention turning, while my pulse climbed into my throat. Avoidance became impossible. Even silence drew her attention. The tension didn't go unnoticed by others. During one discussion, when my interpretation was challenged dismissively, she intervened with precision that felt sharper than necessary. Her correction was clear, firm, leaving no room for misunderstanding. It wasn't just academic, it carried weight. The room felt it. So did I. She recovered quickly, returning to neutrality, but the moment had already left its mark. After class, the shift followed me. Conversations turned curious, observant, lightly probing. People noticed more than they said outright. Assumptions hovered just beneath the surface. Among them was Audrey, confident, sharp, effortlessly engaging. She was easy to be around, easy to like, and under different circumstances, that might have been enough. But comparison made everything unfair. Simple gestures from her, light touches, ease a laughter, felt distant when measured against even the smallest accidental contact from Camille. It wasn't rational, it was unavoidable, and somehow Camille noticed, not in obvious ways, never openly, but in subtle shifts, tightened posture, colder tone, sharper precision. Moments that revealed more than they were meant to. One small interaction was enough, a glance at the wrong time, proximity that lasted a second too long, a smile directed elsewhere. The reaction was controlled but unmistakable. The rest of that class carried a quiet tension threaded through every word she spoke. Afterward, the observation came from outside, light, teasing, but perceptive enough to land close to the truth. It would have been easier to deny everything. It wasn't that simple. Life continued around it all. Invitations, conversations, moments that should have felt uncomplicated. I accepted some of them, if only to maintain the illusion of normalcy. But even in those moments, the comparison remained. Presence without weight. Connection without depth. Something essential missing. When asked directly, the truth surfaced in the only way it could. Partial, restrained, but undeniable. There was someone else, not in any real sense. Not in any defined way, but enough to make anything else feel impossible. Kenness met that admission without pressure, without demand. It should have brought relief. Instead, it added guilt to everything else already sitting beneath the surface. And still, there was no avoiding her. Another meeting. Another closed space with carefully maintained boundaries. Another conversation disguised as something purely academic. This time, the setting shifted slightly, closer, less formal. Just enough to change the atmosphere without breaking any rules. She spoke about my work with the same intensity as before, pushing against hesitation, pointing out where I held back, where I softened arguments that should have been stronger. Her observations were precise. Too precise. They reached beyond the page, touching something personal whether intended or not. When I pushed back, when I named what she was doing, seeing too much, something in her expression shifted again, not denial, not defense. Something quieter. Something heavier. The moment lingered, unspoken but understood. Attention returned to the paper between us. To a line she had marked as dishonest. The critique was simple, but the implication wasn't. Because the line wasn't just about a character. It reflected something closer. A truth neither of us had fully said out loud, restraint and rejection distant and intention. What looked like one thing, and what it actually meant. The space between those ideas held everything neither of us was willing or able to resolve. Her composure returned in the most controlled way. Elegant, distant, untouchable. The kind of restraint that made everything feel easier on the surface, while quietly absolving everyone involved. But something in me tightened against it. I said what I shouldn't have said. That sometimes restraint is just another form of rejection. She didn't deny it. She acknowledged it with the same precision she used for everything else. And then added the truth that made it worse. Sometimes it's cowardice. Silence settled heavily between us. The rain filled the gaps where words should have gone. My pulse echoed louder than either of us would admit. I pushed further than I should have, asking her to name which one she had been. She didn't answer. Instead, she moved away. Physically, deliberately, crossing to the window, pouring water with steady hands that revealed nothing. When she returned, the space between us was carefully restored. No accidental contact this time. No room for interpretation. The conversation shifted, but not randomly. She asked about the reading, about Audrey, about details that had no place in a purely academic exchange. The question landed with more weight than it should have. The tone remained professional. The intent did not. The tension sharpened when I called it out, when I refused to let the shift pass as something casual. Her restraint faltered again, just slightly, before snapping back into place. What followed wasn't calm. It wasn't anger either. It was something more complicated. Frustration layered with something deeper, something she was trying not to name. I moved, pacing once, unable to stay still under the pressure of everything left unsaid. The words came sharper than intended, cutting through the careful structure she had built. I refused to accept that everything between us had been imagined, that it had all been reduced to immaturity, to something one-sided and easily dismissed. That was where she broke. Not fully, not dramatically, but enough. She said it clearly. I hadn't imagined it. The truth landed hard, shifting the entire weight of the room. And just as quickly, she tried to contain it, framing it, limiting it, insisting it changed nothing about the present or the boundaries she refused to cross. But the damage was already done. The question that followed came from a place I didn't fully understand until it was out. Why she cared about Audrey, why it mattered who I spent time with. Her answer was quieter than anything else she had said, measured. Controlled, but dangerously honest. She was trying to understand the nature of her own concern. Whether it belonged to professionalism, obligation, or something far more reckless. That admission shifted everything. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. For a moment, all the restraint in her seemed close to breaking. She stopped it before it could. The plea that followed wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She asked me not to push further. Not to make her regret what she had already allowed to surface. But it was already too late. Whatever line had been drawn no longer held the same shape. She shut it down the only way she knew how. By retreating completely into structure, into analysis, into the safety of academic language. The shift was immediate, almost jarring. Discussion returned to the paper, to arguments and revisions, to critique sharp enough to feel like control being reasserted. Anyone listening would have heard nothing unusual. Only scholarship, only discipline, nothing personal. But underneath it, everything remained unresolved. By the time I left, my work was stronger. The aftermath lingered longer than expected. For a brief moment, there had been something close to clarity, something almost reckless enough to feel real. That illusion didn't last. The next day replaced it with something colder. A department event, crowded and artificial, filled with polite conversations and forced connections. I attended out of obligation, not interest, moving through it with practiced detachment. Audrey found me easily, pulling me into conversation, into something lighter, easier to navigate. Her presence grounded things in a way that felt almost intentional, something uncomplicated in contrast to everything else. For a while, it worked, until it didn't. Across the room, Camille stood in quiet control, composed enough to seem untouchable. Every detail of her appearance reinforced distance, authority, precision. Then her gaze shifted. It landed exactly where it shouldn't have. On me, on Audrey, on the space between us. The change was immediate, subtle, but unmistakable. Cold replaced neutral. Controlled turned sharp. Nothing was said, nothing needed to be. The awareness settled quietly, threading itself through the rest of the evening. Conversations continued. Movements remained casual, but attention lingered in places it wasn't supposed to. Even outside, in the cool air, the tension followed. Audrey saw more than most people did. She understood enough to ask the question that mattered. Not in words that demanded, but in a way that cut directly to the truth. Whether this was about someone who didn't want me, or someone who couldn't. The distinction mattered. The answer wasn't simple. It never had been. I gave her what honesty I could without unraveling everything else. That whatever this was, it wasn't clean, and it wasn't something I could explain without making it worse. She accepted it with a kind of grace that made everything harder. No pressure, no accusation, just understanding, and then she closed the distance. Not with intention that complicated things further, but with something gentle, deliberate, and clear. A kiss to my cheek, soft, brief. Careful, not enough to blur lines, but enough to leave an imprint. Not because of what it was, but because of who might have seen it, because even in that moment, part of me was still aware of someone else entirely. And that awareness changed everything. That was for me, Audrey said softly, her voice steady. Not because I thought it would fix anything. The library door opened behind us. I turned too quickly. Camille stood there, one hand still resting on the brass handle, her expression unreadable in the light spilling out from behind her. For one suspended, brutal second, no one moved. Audrey recovered first, effortless as ever, her composure smooth and untouchable. She greeted Camille with cool politeness, as if the moment carried no weight at all. Camille's gaze flicked once, brief, precise, to my cheek, where the warmth of Audrey's goodbye still lingered. Then it returned to Audrey's face. Silence settled in, not neutral, not empty, but unstable, like something beneath the surface had shifted. Audrey broke it lightly, offering an explanation that didn't really explain anything. Camille's eyes moved back to me, her acknowledgement quiet but loaded with meaning. I should have said something simple. Instead, I stood there, pulse loud enough to feel in my teeth. Audrey gave my arm a gentle squeeze before stepping away, leaving me alone in the doorway with Camille, and with everything neither of us knew how to handle. The air between us felt too heavy for something so undefined. I spoke first, deflecting, choosing the wrong kind of words because the right ones felt impossible. Camille stepped fully outside, letting the door close behind her. The quiet that followed carried weight. Distant music, dry leaves skittering across stone, everything else fading into the background. She told me not to pretend, not to act like I didn't understand why this was difficult. The sharpness of it steadied something in me. I pushed back, questioning where the difficulty truly belonged. Her response came quickly, edged with something restrained but real, for both of us. The truth of that hung between us, undeniable. In the low light, she looked less like a professor and more like the woman from years ago. The one who had tried to be careful, to be kind, and still hadn't escaped the impact of it. I tried to reduce the moment, to make it smaller than it felt. It didn't work. She stepped closer. Not enough to touch, but enough to erase the illusion of distance. Every detail became sharper, the faint pulse at her throat. The tension she wasn't hiding quite as well anymore. She said it evenly, as if control could carry the weight of it. I was free to do whatever I wanted. She had no claim, no right to care, and yet she did. That was the problem. The admission landed harder than anything else had. She recognized it immediately, tried to pull it back, tried to erase it before it could take shape. It was too late. I refused to let it disappear into silence. She tried to end it again, telling me to leave, to step away before something broke beyond repair. The reason came with a clarity that felt more dangerous than anything else she'd said. She was losing control. That honesty shifted everything. It stripped away pretense, leaving something raw in its place. I should have walked away. Instead, I stepped closer. I said what I had carried too long, that I was tired of being the only one who looked undone by this. She went completely still. When she spoke, her voice barely held together. One more word, one more push, and she might forget every reason she had to stay away. The air between us felt charged, fragile, on the edge of something irreversible. And then it ended. Not because we chose it, because we were interrupted. Voices cut through the moment, pulling everything back into place. She stepped away instantly, distance snapping back like it had never been broken. Her tone returned to something formal, something safe. The moment disappeared, but it didn't. By morning, it had changed shape entirely, a blurred image, a careless caption. Speculation wrapped in certainty, something private had been dragged into public view, there had been nothing real to expose. No actions, no evidence, nothing beyond tension and history, but that didn't matter. It was enough the reaction came fast. Messages, assumptions, commentary building around something fragile and unfinished. The panic wasn't only mine, it extended outward, into consequences, into reputations, into futures that could be damaged by something that technically hadn't even happened. The first real impact came through absence, a message, a change. A quiet shift that made everything feel suddenly official. She removed herself, requested distance in a way that formalized what had always been unspoken. The decision made sense. It still hurt. More than expected. Because it wasn't just distance, it was a choice made without me. When I confronted her, the conversation stayed controlled, careful under the awareness of watching eyes. Her reasoning was precise, correct, and still incomplete. When she finally spoke honestly, even for a moment, it carried more weight than everything else combined. If she had been choosing for herself, distance would not have been the answer. Then she was gone again, retreating before anything more could be said. Time moved as it always does. The noise faded. The rumor lost its edge. Life resumed its shape. The space between us didn't return to what it had been before. It became something quieter, more deliberate, more difficult, distant, once forced into place, revealed itself as something with its own kind of intimacy. Weeks passed like that, controlled, restrained, unresolved, until the night everything finally broke open. The building was nearly empty, the quiet deep enough to make every sound feel louder. When I stepped into the classroom, she was already there, my forgotten note cards in her hand. For a moment, we just looked at each other. No audience, no interruptions, no distance left to hide behind. She said it wasn't a good idea. I answered before I could stop myself, pushing back against the pattern we had repeated too many times. The frustration came out sharper than intended. So did the truth. I refused to accept that nothing had ever mattered, that everything could be reduced to caution and distance while the reality of it still lingered between us. This time, she didn't deflect. She told me the truth, not the careful version, not the controlled explanation, the real one. Her life back then hadn't been stable. It hadn't been safe. It had been fragile, complicated, barely holding together. Responsibility had outweighed everything else. Survival had come first, and then there had been me, young, standing at the beginning of something open and uncertain, offering something she hadn't been in a position to accept. She admitted what that moment had meant. Not as a romance, not as possibility, but as something dangerous in its timing. Something that could have been mistaken for more than it was. Something she refused to take from me. The words settled heavily between us. Then came the quietest admission of all. She had kept the note all those years. Not forgotten, not dismissed, held on to. That truth shifted something fundamental, because it meant the distance had never been emptiness. It had always been something else. Something chosen. Something restrained. Something that had never really gone away. And this semester, she continued, I walked into a classroom and found you in the third row, looking at me exactly the way I had trained myself to forget. The memory tightened something in her posture, even as she stood still. I stepped closer before I could stop myself. The question came out without protection. She didn't hesitate. She didn't soften it. Yes. The answer moved through me like something irreversible. Then she added with quiet precision that it existed now in different ways. Both complicated, both inconvenient. The honesty almost made me laugh, even as it burned. She held my gaze, steady and unflinching, as if I had earned the truth by surviving everything that came before it. She knew the rhythm of my presence now, the sound of my footsteps, the shape of my arguments, the way I stopped cushioning my thoughts when they mattered most. She knew when someone stood too close to me. She knew she had been jealous. That admission broke something open. It hurt and healed at the same time. The semester, she said, had an end. A clear one. After that, whatever this was would either disappear or finally exist somewhere honest. I pushed against that, wanting something real rather than something carefully contained. Her answer came with quiet certainty. Then we would wait, until real no longer came at a cost to me. She reached into her bag and handed me the note I had given her years ago. The paper was worn, softened by time, proof that it had been kept, handled, remembered. When my degree was complete, she said, if I still wanted something that belonged only to us, she would meet me there. With nothing hidden, the weight of that promise settled into my hands. I tested the boundary once more, asking for something immediate, something reckless. Her breath caught, and her answer carried both truth and restraint. In her mind, yes. In reality, no. It was painfully, unmistakably her. We walked back through the rain with space carefully held between us. At the gate, she stopped and marked the time left. 24 days. I told her I would be counting. The rest of the semester passed like something suspended. Fragile and stretched thin, she held herself together with visible effort. Distance remained in place, enforced and necessary. Others stepped into roles around us. Support, distraction, protection in ways they didn't fully understand. When the moment came to stand in front of a room and speak, everything sharpened. The work mattered. The performance mattered. A careless comment tried to drag something private into the open again, reducing it to implication. It didn't stand. Authority cut it down quickly, restoring focus where it belonged. Afterward, there was acknowledgement, quiet, knowing, almost amused at how visible everything had been beneath the surface. All that remained was to finish. Time narrowed to days, 5. Then none. The moment the final confirmation appeared, everything shifted. Completion, closure, freedom, and then an invitation, not formal, not cautious, personal, a place, a time, a choice. I didn't hesitate. The greenhouse stood quiet and almost forgotten, lit softly from within. She was already there, stripped of titles and distance, standing without anything left to hide behind. Her greeting was simple, almost disarming. I stepped closer, asking for the version of truth that carried weight. She gave it. She hadn't rejected me years ago because I was foolish. She had rejected me because she was the one responsible for protecting what I didn't yet understand how to protect. She had wanted to say yes, and that was exactly why she had said no. The confession landed heavier than anything else. This time, there was no distance to retreat into. She spoke about the present with the same honesty, about everything she had felt, everything she had tried to control, everything that had made the semester both disciplined and unbearable. The truth of it broke through whatever restraint was left when she said she wanted me. Not as memory, not as temptation, but as who I was now. It felt like something long delayed finally arriving. I told her what had lived on my side of it. The anger, the time, the love that had lasted longer than it should have. She understood all of it, and when the moment came, there was no hesitation left. The question was asked. The answer was given. The space between us closed. The first touch carried caution, giving room for doubt. Then it disappeared. Replaced by something certain, the kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't fragile. It felt like resolution, like something that had waited long enough. Afterward, the quiet held something softer. Conversation came easier. Plans unfolded without secrecy, without fear, without the need to hide behind anything. Morning brought its own kind of clarity. The world returned. Celebration, noise, familiar faces, endings and beginnings overlapping at once. She waited. That was how I knew it was real. Not urgency, not impulse, patience. When we finally stood face to face again, there was no distance left to maintain, no rules left to navigate. Only honesty. Everything else followed naturally. Acknowledgement, presence, the quiet understanding of what this had become. Time moved forward, as it always does. And with it came something simple, something public, something that once would have been impossible. No hesitation, no careful phrasing, no hidden meaning, just truth, spoken plainly. For years, the story had seemed defined by rejection, by distance, by everything that hadn't been allowed to exist. It turned out the defining moment was much smaller than all of that. A single sentence, spoken without fear, nothing left to hide, nothing left to protect. Only something real, finally allowed to be seen. After all that time, the miracle was never just that Camille Ardan finally kissed me. It was that when she finally chose me, she did it in the open, without hesitation, without hiding, without turning something real into something secret. She chose me in the light.